Good morning. Happy Friday, class. Today, our case study, which I hope exemplifies many of the themes that we have covered this week, is going to be about Japan. Now, Japan is a little bit different in many ways from some of the other case studies that we've done. I remember the first video I created of this format was on sex trafficking in Eastern Europe. So that's a serious social problem, right? And then we did the civil war in Syria. That is also a very serious social problem. And then we did the rise of digital authoritarianism and ethnic oppression in China. And that's a very serious social problem, certainly for the people that happen to live under it. And I feel Japan breaks that mold a little bit. Japan is a wealthy, industrialized democracy. It's very safe. It's very democratic. It's, as I've said a couple times, it's got the best life expectancy in the world. Japan is not exactly a terrible place to live, right? Not anywhere close to, like, if you are a Uyghur in Northwest China, that's a terrible place to live. If you are a trafficked woman in Ukraine, that's a terrible place to live. If you are in Syria, that's a terrible place to live. Japan, however, is not. So why am I talking about Japan? Well, I feel that it exemplifies many of this week's themes. For starters, it is a very highly populated nation. 126 million people, one of only a small handful of countries that have over 100 million people living in it. It's also 91% urbanized, which is almost like a measure of development, right? The more developed a country has become, the more urbanized it usually gets. And then finally, it's a society that's aging. It's a very dependent society as a result of that aging. So what you're seeing here, I pulled this out of a historical study on Japan, the crude birth rate in Japan from 1800 to 2020. So a lot of data here. You can see that it's been a fairly severe downward trend in terms of Japanese fertility. The Japanese are not making enough babies. They just aren't. And this is creating a demographic time bomb for the society. So the last year we have full data for, 2019, the society, Japan itself, now keep in mind, 126 million people live in Japan. They had fewer than 1 million births in 2019. So you do the math on that, that's not adding a lot of young people to a society. And that, when you combine with the natural process of death, the population in Japan actually shrank by 300,000 people in that 1 year alone, which, again, in a society and a country of 126 million people, losing 300,000 doesn't sound like a lot. Price that out over years going forward and account for the fact that that is likely to get even more severe because the life expectancy is like kind of plateaued. The Japanese already live a long time. There's not a ton you can add to their life expectancy. And the birth rate continues to go down. So that's a bit of a recipe for a more rapidly declining population. So that's the puzzle. Why is Japan shrinking? And what can be done about it? If you go to Japan, which, full disclosure, I have never been. I would love to go to Japan, but I never have. What I've read about this puzzle in Japan, do I really want to go? Yeah, all right. So like, I know that like a meme kind of got popular in the last year or so called "Okay Boomer." Yeah, I'm not that old. I understand that. And Japan has a real element of that too. Because keep in mind, in a society where the median age is 48.4, that's a lot of old people and a lot of people your parents' age and a little bit older than that. And their tendency is to just look at the young people and blame everything on them. Why aren't you guys taking care of your business? Why aren't you guys having kids? Why aren't you guys coupling up and getting married? So the tendency is really to blame young people. That actually speaks to something that's sort of endemic in Japanese society anyway, which is because there's such a value placed on hard work that anybody who comes up short, it's very much looked at as their own fault. And that does impede policy in many ways, I think. My argument is going to be simple. When I say my argument, I'm not saying that I am the only one that has come up with this argument. I'm just saying it's the argument that I am making for the purposes of this lecture, and it draws upon the work of others, right? I think that Japan's birth rate, it is falling, and it has been falling since the late 80s because there simply just aren't enough good opportunities for young people. For men in particular, this is something that is going to hurt women. But Japan, due to its gender norms, like this is going to become the issues of their local economy and national economy. It's going to be more serious for men than it is for women, at least as far as explaining the dependent variable is concerned. So actually, let me put that another way. This is male issues are a bigger obstacle to family formation than women's issues are in Japan. And I'll explain why I feel that in a second. Although the first thing you have to know is that Japanese men are heavily expected to be the breadwinners. It is a society where that is prized and that is socialized and really pushed into men from a very young age. It's what people see their own fathers doing. It's what people see men on the street doing. It's what they believe they're supposed to do going forward. And so then men are not marrying and they are not having children for the very simple reason that they know they can't afford to. And there are many elements of Japanese society that lead to that point A to point B journey, right? From like, there aren't enough good opportunities to then causing people to delay family formation. And their partners know it too. That's the other thing. Like, it's not just that men feel that they can't afford to do this. Their partners know it too, and are a little more reluctant to get involved with somebody who is viewed as figuring it out, as opposed to somebody who already has it going on for themselves. And there just aren't enough men in that position to go around at this point. So to review, Japanese men are expected to be breadwinners, and their inability to do so is what's causing a stunted and delayed family formation, which cuts down on the number of children that people will ultimately have. Okay. All right. So moving on from that then, the issue we're really dealing with is economic insecurity. Now, from a cross-sectional standpoint, that means just to look at one point in time, Japan's economy is actually very healthy. Their unemployment, believe it or not, is below 3%. That's really good for the worker. That creates decent wages, right? Like unemployment below 3% is not bad. But what's new is the rise of what's known as unsteady employment. In the United States, we refer to this as freelance work, or we refer to this as the gig economy. And Japan has a substantial portion of its economy tied up in unsteady labor markets, or what they call irregular work. To say that a job is irregular is to say, like, it's not to say it's not full-time hours. It might be, although it's often not. But even if it is, it's irregular work in that you don't know how long it's going to last, right? Like, so this in Japan, here's one odd sort of cultural, one amusing cultural element of 7-Eleven. I can tell, or I just gave it away, of Japan. I can tell you, the Japanese are obsessed with 7-Eleven. There are a million 7-Elevens in Japan, and so job like that, working as a cashier or doing something in 7-Eleven, that's not the best paying job. But the bigger issue for the Japanese is that it's not really regular work either. It might not last more than a year or two, and then they can move on to somebody else. And as it turns out, 40% of the Japanese workforce is irregular. That may not seem crazy in the United States, but in Japan, what this is doing is violating a very core social norm. The Japanese have a real norm of lifetime employment. And so the system that men in particular have been raised to believe in and socialized to accept is that you are going to enter into this system and you will get a job at a young age with a major corporation or some company, and you will work hard, and that would entitle you to essentially lifetime employment. And you could rely on things like steady raises, steady work hours, and steady employment. And so if a system is created that breaks that model, it's not just creating a little economic insecurity, it's creating what sociologists call anomie, right? Anomie is like it's a term from the old social theorist Emile Durkheim. It refers to a state of normlessness, right? Where people don't really understand the norms because they are now out of sync with the values within a society. So in the United States, right, like we look at this and it's one thing to say, oh, well, that, that doesn't give people health insurance and that doesn't give people, a lot of economic prospects. In Japan, it's looked at as like you have no chance in life if you can't get one of these jobs. And they used to be readily available for just about everybody, and they simply aren't anymore. And that is something that has really, really serious implications for marriage and childbearing. Because men without regular work just are not considered desirable. See this picture I have of this Japanese family? Do you know how I know that's an unrealistic expectation? There are 3 kids there. And that's just not what Japanese families look like. Yeah, men without regular work are not considered desirable partners. Let me go backwards for a second. 40% of the Japanese workforce is irregular. So that is basically saying that close to half is not considered as having their shit together and not considered as being enough to be a partner in a family. And so even if a partner, like, because for example, this is not just a male issue, even though it's got, legitimate masculine effects, even if a partner doesn't care, the parents are likely to oppose it because they come from a different generation. So even if a Japanese woman says, I love this person and I don't care, I'm just going to marry this person because that, if when you know, that type of thing. The parents of both individuals in that relationship are very likely to oppose it and say, wait, and don't go forward until such time that somebody has their economic stuff figured out. And this is also the case if a woman, like even if a woman herself is in irregular employment and so is the man that she wants to marry, partners will still oppose that because of the male irregular employment. And so we can see this priced out in everybody's mating decisions and partnership decisions. Among irregular workers aged 30 to 40, only 30% of them are married. The comparison group there is those that are regularly employed. So in the same age group, 30 to 40, 56 of those people, when regularly employed, are married. So there's a pretty big disparity here, and we can tell, and that tells you from a descriptive standpoint that, yeah, irregularity in the Japanese labor market is holding back family formation. And most importantly, to bring this around, like you got to get people to really believe in a system in order for it to continue operating. And in this particular case, in the Japanese system, the fact that people don't have regular employment, that's generally blamed on the individual. The Japanese have a sort of like, Japan is a very odd society. I guess I shouldn't use the term odd, but it's odd in the sense that they have a very sort of collective value system, right? Like about the Japanese nation, right? And like looking out for others, right? And treating others with respect. But the other side of that in Japan is that if you can't live up to what these traditional values are, that's not viewed as being an issue of macroeconomic issues and government policy. That's generally looked at as being your own goddamn fault. That's your own fault. And people internalize the feelings of being a failure in such a system. So all this trickles down to having like really serious implications for marriage and childbearing. Though I will say that Japanese guy in that picture, he looks happy. It's a nice smile. Probably because he has a regular job, assuming those kids are his. Women can suffer from this too. I don't want to the fact that men have such like masculine expectations placed on them obviously is going to have implications for women. Women do suffer from this too. Women are likely as well to end up in irregular employment, and there they deal with issues like unpredictable hours, low pay, sexism in the workplace, which can be severe in Japan. But for our dependent variable here, irregularity in male employment is much more of an obstacle to marriage. And the reason why that is because once a child is created, who is likely to stay at work and who is likely to leave the work that they're in? And in Japan, it's a more extreme example of something that's already happening in Europe and the United States. 70% of Japanese women leave work after having a child, 7 out of 10. And so what do they do at that point? Well, by and large, I mean, there are some government benefits here, but the belief is that they're going to have to depend, right? This newly created family is going to have to depend upon the husband's salary, the man's salary, for a period of time. And if it's not up to par, that's a problem. Trying to do some like cross-national economic calculations in my head, and I could be doing this entirely wrong because I'm doing this on the fly. But I'm aware of about over half, right? So about half, let's say, of Japanese irregular workers are in jobs that are paying less than 2 million yen annually. And what that comes out to is like about $16,000. And so if you're in an irregular workforce, like Japan can be an expensive society to live in, especially in the cities. And so if that salary is not up to par, right, the man's salary ends up being a bigger roadblock, a bigger obstacle to marriage, to childbearing, and to having like a second and a third, which is really what Japan needs if they're going to start growing again. It's not just one kid. No, it's not going to do it. They need 2 or 3. And so you can see this in this graph here, right? Half of Japanese female workers are not employed full time, right? You can see this is a combination of Japanese women leaving the labor force entirely and taking irregular jobs, right? Like females are actually more likely to be in irregular jobs than males are, which is, a bit of patriarchy in the workplace. But again, that just isn't viewed as the same obstacle that it is for men, because women are more likely to come in and to come out depending on where they're at. In their fertility decisions, I should say. Okay. All right, so moving on then, from a relationship perspective, this becomes an issue here because it's even a roadblock for even having relationships in the first place. Japan is not a country that's known for having a big hookup culture, right? You don't really see a lot of casual sex in Japan. It exists, I'm sure, but not the way it does in certain parts of Western Europe. And so, like, the process by which people, like, you could say that, all right, maybe it's not the biggest problem in the world that, like, all right, they're waiting longer to get married, but at least they're having relationships. No, they're not doing that either. 70% of unmarried men in Japan aged 18 to 34 and 60% of unmarried women aged 18 to 34 are not in a relationship at all. So the opposite sex is just not hanging around each other enough in ways that would lead to, things happening and people falling in love and people deciding to get married. People really look at it as like, I got to get all this stuff in order first, and then I will go forward and be able to do just start a family. And so here you can see that the global gender gap index here, Japan is really far down on the list. And that's due to sort of very traditional gender norms here. We can see this, like, countries generally that have a lot of gender equality usually have more casual sex and usually have more of a hookup culture. Japan doesn't have that, right? Like, you still have a real tightly controlled system of sexual norms that does not, lead to a lot of time spent with the opposite sex. So you add all this up, and it's a problem. And the problem actually gets worse. Because once irregularity became a standard part of the Japanese culture, this surge in irregularity has another latent consequence. And it's the fact that already Japanese people work harder than you do. They just do. And what this has meant, right, there's a real culture in Japan of like work hard, work hard, work hard, work hard. And now companies feel, kind of rightly, that they can mistreat their workers more than they already were. And they can overwork their employees. Because you should feel lucky that you even have a job in the first place. And there's always somebody, if somebody leaves the job because the hours are too brutal, or like you're not getting paid for the overtime that you're performing, which happens with stunning regularity in Japan, there's always somebody else we can go to, right? There's another person out there who is going to be willing to, take the treatment or take what it is, just because they want to have that job. And so Japanese companies are known for, like, Japanese workers are known for working very hard and very long hours. Japanese companies are known for having incredibly harsh working conditions. There is a term in Japan called karoshi. It translates to death by overwork, right? People who have died from exhaustion, basically. The fact that they even have a word for this tells you, I think, quite a bit about Japanese work conditions. So even if you get that good job, that can still be a burden and a roadblock to starting a family, because now you have that job. Now you're seen as a desirable partner and possibly a desirable husband, I assume. And then you have to work incredibly long hours. So you're not even seeing your wife all that much. Or if you're single, let's say, let me go backwards. There's not even a lot of time to meet people of the opposite sex. I read an article about this, about like a man described what it was like working for a major Japanese corporation. And he said, like, yeah, I was making a lot of money. I should have been a desirable, date. I should have been dating. But because of his hour, he's working 7 a.m. to 12 at night and barely sleeping. Like, the only time that he ever generally saw women was when his bosses dragged him out to a strip club and then stuck him with the bill, right? And in Japan, like, refusing invitations like that, like, you're expected to go out for drinks with people, you're expected to go to these things with your bosses. It's considered very rude to turn that down. It's also considered very rude in Japan, in an office place, to leave and go home before your boss does. So everyone's gonna just stick around as long as it goes. The good jobs can be absolutely brutal in Japan, and they can leave young single men with no time to date, and they can leave young partnered men with no time to, like, have a family. And then all of that family burden falls on women, which many actually are willing to accept, but not at the level of 2, 3, or 4 children, which is what Japan needs right now if they're going to grow their society. And so what makes Japan a bit exceptional here, because Japan is not the only nation with low fertility. So is Spain and Italy and Portugal. They're not the only country with a rise in irregular work. India's got a thriving informal labor market, and the United States has seen the rise of the gig economy. They're not the only nation with a patriarchy. There are like 100 that have something there as well. So what makes Japan unique? Like, I've been through this a little bit, like, already today, but if we tally this up, regular employment is such a core value in Japan, in a way that the average American has a hard time understanding, I think. It also has a real culture of hard work. So those two things together, that leads to people feeling that they're a failure if they cannot get regular employment and can't be in a position to work very hard. And Japan also has very weak labor unions, like very weak labor unions. Labor unions in Japan collaborate with corporations all the time. They're generally focused on preserving the good jobs that exist, rather than expanding labor protections for people that lack it. So the labor unions have done nothing about this rise of irregular employment. They're really much more likely to have been co-opted by the corporation in the first place. So what happens next? Well, the Shinzo Abe administration, that is the longtime prime minister of Japan, has long vowed to address this. The Japanese are not blind to what is happening demographically in their country. And as I've said, they're very resistant to immigration. They know their country is shrinking. Economically, politically, and demographically. They're aware of this. And so what I think Japan is sort of, it's the other side of what we discussed in Europe just a couple days ago, where I said that you have to put women in a position where they feel comfortable wanting to have that additional child. Japan shows you that men matter too, right? It takes 2 to make a baby. Japan has put forward a lot of policies that are centered on helping women with their work-life balance, and it really hasn't worked. It takes 2 to make a baby. And if Japan is going to start growing again, it's time to help the men find a little bit of stability there. And I would argue that would have benefits for everybody within the society. So you get it now. We're all in this together, right? Anyway, that's what I got. Japan is a fascinating society for all those reasons. It is one of those rare examples where like the entire civilizational culture is embedded within one country, basically, because Japan doesn't have a ton of out migration. It doesn't have a ton of in migration. And also Japan, since the end of World War II, Japan has been one of the best friends the United States has ever had from a international and diplomatic standpoint. And I don't know. I just think that like Japan is a country, it's a special country for us in the United States to want to support. You know, that's something I'm hoping for and looking for going over the next, 10 years, let's say, right, as China tries to remake and reshape the world, strengthening Japan, right, having an Asian counterexample to Chinese might, I think, could be really helpful to preserving democracy in that region, right? To see that, like, here is a country that is making democracy work in Asia, and I suspect that will be meaningful, so. Anyway, I look forward to reading and grading your exams this weekend. I will see everybody online on Monday. I'll send an email out this weekend about my expectations for online class. Safe travels. I know most people are probably moving out and going somewhere else this weekend. Be safe, right? Stay healthy. Don't get COVID. If there's anything I can do to help you guys out in the process, let me know. Bye-bye.